All right. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, and by offering the peace and blessings of God to His most beloved messenger, we begin our third session of our seminar entitled Knowledge, Structuring the Mind, and Awakening Consciousness. Once again, to retain and revise what we did earlier in the previous sessions, we went over the concept of knowledge, different categorizations of knowledge, between true knowledge and false knowledge, between meaningful knowledge, meaningless knowledge, between higher knowledge and lower knowledge. We talked about different characteristics of each type. Then we spoke about the concept of criteria, and we explained what is a criteria. We differentiated between two different kinds of criteria, objective and subjective. And at the end, we established a relation between consciousness and the concept of happiness, comfort, etc. And we called it blissful ignorance. Now, in this session, or before that, in the second session, we talked about the two sides, talked about dichotomy, the concept of dichotomy or duality. We gave examples of this dichotomy, and we spoke about it, and we said that everything falls under the concept of dichotomy. We then moved on to the right way to visualize dichotomy, and how is that important in making the correct observations and the correct judgments, which we emphasized the importance of a spectrum in relation to nuance. So we spoke about the concept of nuance, the gray area, and that the spectrum helps us make precise and accurate judgments and conclusions. Right now, in this session, the third session, we will speak about power dynamics. In other words, the role of power in everything. So this is a very interesting and critical concept, which has a relation with pretty much everything that we have in our world. Now, before that, we have this preparatory exercise. We have an illustration in front of us. So try to interpret the image in light of the lesson's title, Power Dynamics, while using the method of structuralism. So we have an image in front of us, and an image is always intentional. It's a design made by an agency. This agency has motives. Therefore, we need to see the structure, try to find out the different elements that builds this structure and the relationship between these elements. Therefore, we understand everything about this image or whatever concept that we are dealing with. So you have a man holding in his hand two puppet-like subjects, a man and a woman. So this incorporates, in a way, in a visual way, some sort of power dynamics. We can say that the man is controlling these two people, or he is manipulating them, while they are not aware of it. This is very important to clarify and to notice. Right? Let's move on. So always the first thing that we do, according to the method that we agreed upon, the WH questions, is to define first what are we talking about. So power dynamics. Let's take each one separately. Power is defined as the extent of ability or capacity to do something or act in a particular way. All right, so power is related to the ability. If you can, then you have the power to do. All right, so ability, even if you do not act upon it, is considered power because you own it. You have it in you. All right, so this is the potential. If you have potential, you have the power. If you have the capacity, you have the power. All right, this is one definition, but I believe it is better defined as the capacity to direct and influence the course of events or others. In this sense, it is the degree of control. So here we relate power with control. If you control something, whether it is something physical or abstract, whether you have control over someone, or whether you have control over an event. Therefore, you have the power over these different things. All right, so it is the power, the capacity to direct and influence. All right, direct whichever way you want and influence the others. Now, moving on to dynamics. It is a scientific term that signifies the study of motion and changes. All right, so it has something to do with science in essence. All right, the study of motion and changes. Motion, the way things move, things operate, and changes. Things, how do they change? How do they interact or react to other things? All right, all of this is included. It is used later on by psychologists and sociologists, most notably Antonio Gramsci and Michel Foucault. All right, Antonio is a political thinker, is an Italian of political thinker, which was famous for his political theories and the relation of power in politics. All right, how the people in power use power itself in their policies and the way they govern the people. Now, Michel Foucault is, in my opinion, the best one who dealt with this concept in terms of thinkers, Western thinkers. And he found out some very interesting results and conclusions in relation to power. And his story is pretty amazing to discuss. So, in a nutshell, Michel Foucault is a sociologist who was very much interested in the concept of power. And his theory, power relations, highlights that power exists in every relation. All right? And it plays a big role in anything that happens, to the point that Michel Foucault thought that power itself is objective and is absolute, in the sense that you cannot escape from it. You are always a subject under this concept. Now, later on, with time, he sought to move away and escape this concept of power. By doing what? By destroying the borders that humans have set for themselves. Of course, Michel Foucault, not a believer in God, therefore he thought that everything was constructed, all right? But power alone is outside of this construct. So, in a sense, he made power as a concept God. We can interpret it this way. So, as I said, he sought to escape this We can call it a matrix. By doing what? By exceeding the borders, by exceeding the limits. So first of many things, he tried drugs, tried anything that is taboo. All right, because in his theory, he said that what is taboo has a lot of power. All right, and decides social relations and the way people interact with each other. After drugs, he sought gay relationships, both being, the giver and the taker. And at last, he went even as far as becoming a pedophile. All right, and his this is documented uh, bluntly and publicly, and he actually got away with it in terms of courts and whatever. Of course, he did not get away anything he did. At the end of the day, he will be judged the same as anyone else. But people still talk to him, I mean, talk about him in a way that is very high and very respectable, even though he did these atrocious things. Why? Because he came up with such theory and he was renowned and smart or whatever. All right, so keep in mind this story because it will play a role later on when we discuss the concept of power. All right, we said that this concept is deeply rooted in history and found in Islamic literature, not only in Western literature, of course. This is something that was discussed all along history, from Chinese uh, thinkers, old ones, to Indian ones, to Greeks, as well as Islamic thinkers and scholars, i.e., the power of the sword. All right, this is what they call it in Islam, especially, there is a famous saying of Sheikh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah when he calls it, or when he says, Kitabun Yahdi wa Sayfun Yansur, a book that guides and the sword that gives victory. So the sword that gives victory is power, of course, and power has a great role. But what is this role? This is what we are going to discover in this session, inshallah. Now let's analyze power and see some examples to see that, or to realize that it exists in pretty much everything conceivable, everything that we have around us. Even though it is hidden, people do not realize it if they are not conscious enough. They are oblivious to the existence of power and the role it plays in their daily life. So power plays a role in every relation that exists between two different things, whether physical or abstract. Examples: the power of motion and attraction on a molecular level. So everything is made of neutrons, molecules, and nuclear, of course. These molecules, they form everything. And by forming everything, they have a relation with each other. In this relation, power exists heavily, which we see with our eyes in motion. All right, the motion itself can only exist through the power that exists between these molecules. Attractions also. Molecules attract one another, and this attraction is a form of power. So this is a physical dimension. The relation between the state and the people. This is an abstract one, but also has physical attributes. So the state exerts or exercises power over the people, or else it cannot govern the people. whether this power is soft or physical or mental, intellectual, emotional. It comes in different shapes and forms. So this is also one way that we can observe power. The relation between husband and wife, father and son, or friends between each other. All of these relations incorporates within them power. And here I am not specifically saying that only the husband has power over the wife, even though overall we can say that that's the case. But in some cases, a wife can have the power over her husband. Maybe not overall, but in specific certain things. Let's give an example. She can have emotional power over him. Yes, physically he is more imposing. Mentally he may be more imposing, more powerful. But emotionally, she can manipulate him. She can use it as a source of power for her, as a weakness in relation to him. All right, and this is normal actually. It's nothing to be ashamed about in a sense, unless it is used in an incorrect manner, which leads to evil. The same goes on for father and son and friends. We can have friends, they respect each other, but one is more physically imposing than the other. Therefore, he exerts power. Even if he does not act upon it, he has the ability. Should go back to the definition. And the other friend, who is less physically strong, is aware of this, even on a subconscious level. Therefore, it plays a role. He may not be aware, but it still plays a role. This is why it's very important to understand the relation and the role of power. Furthermore, we have the power of gravity and push and pull. This is again a physical example. We can observe it. The relation between the creator and creation. This is obviously incorporating power. The creator has power over his creation. And this one is the most obvious in a sense that anyone who believes and adheres to the existence of God is totally aware of the powerfulness of his creator. This one is the only one that it's so great that even your consciousness is aware of it. You cannot escape it. Okay? This is the absolute power. This what this is what Michel Foucault failed to conclude. All right? This is the missing piece in his theories. The power of beauty. All right? Beauty has power. It is dangerous. It's a dangerous tool, mainly in the hands of females, in the hands of women. They use it as a power move or a power stance in order to exert control, manipulation, etc., over obviously and mainly men. Human nature exerts power over us. It plays a role in our actions, in our thinking, in our emotions, in our decisions. So, this is a power relation. Desire also the same thing, and ego. Okay? So, even psychologically, in the level of your psyche, there are power relations. So even within you, without any exterior people or parts, within you, you have power relations. Therefore, you cannot escape it, which means that you should definitely study power dynamics, understand it, and realize why is it so important. Power dynamics influence the course and motion of events around the world, so everything that exists. Even though it is not an objective criterion to judge by, it has so much power to alter how people perceive things and make judgments. This is why it is very critical to be aware of power relations. First, because they influence the course and motion of events. And if you do not understand this, You will not be able to interpret what is going on around you in a correct manner because you are missing a key piece in the puzzle. Now, what do we mean by power is not an objective criterion to judge by? We mean by that is that power itself cannot tell you what is wrong or what is right. However, due to its special makeup, it has so much power. So power, of course, has power. Itself as a concept has so much power to alter your perspective and alter your judgment, your thinking. Therefore, you can end up thinking that it is an objective criteria and follow the conclusions that it leads you to. We will explain that deeply in the next parts. Now, by understanding how power dynamics work, one becomes able to analyze and make objective observations, without being influenced by power. All right, so you need to escape the influence of power in order to make an objective judgment. You should not let it influence you. You should remove yourself from the equation, especially when used incorrectly. What do we mean by that? Sometimes it can be used correctly. In the case, for example, of a parent teaching his kid, sometimes he may resort to power to enforce a good thing, a good moral, a good ethic, a good behavior. Now we can debate whether that is the best way to do it, or the most effective, or the most efficient. But at the end of the day, the result will be good, or at least better than the opposite. If used incorrectly for the wrong reasons, it will lead to different kinds of problems, whether as a means of enforcement or whether the result. So the result will be false, and also you will create problems in terms of how the other person uh, uses his rationale and makes his judgment. Furthermore, he can himself use it. All right? When you understand power dynamics, and you understand the concept of power, its applications, its different parts, different elements, you can use it properly. Hopefully, of course, we do not condone the incorrect use of power, but of course, you need to be, as an individual, powerful, or else you are not conscious, or else you're not aware, or else you do not make your own decisions. All right? So this is critical and important as an objective of our seminar, of course. This is what we are trying to achieve. As a remark, power is simply an instrument and must not be taken as the end all be all. Now, this is tied to what we talked about objective criteria. Power is not an objective criterion. Why? Because it is simply an instrument. It is not the end result. It is an instrument for something greater, to achieve something bigger, more meaningful, and more righteous, which is the truth. When you use power as an instrument to reach the truth and enforce the truth, enforce goodness, forbid evil, this is the best way to use power. If you use it, or if you try to achieve it and make it your own goal, then you will use whatever means necessary, whether right or wrong, to achieve power. And you will also come up with the wrong judgments, wrong conclusions, wrong actions, and therefore it will create injustice, create oppression, and creates, of course, falsehood. The best example we can give is the example of the Pharaoh. in his story with Moses, peace be upon him. Let's analyze the power relations here and how the Pharaoh understands power relations in a way and uses it to his advantage and see where he was wrong. Let's give a verse from the Quran. So the Pharaoh says, ونادى فرعون في قومه يا قوم أليس لي ملك مصر وهذه الأنهار تجري من تحتي أفلا تبصرون أم أنا خير أم هذا الذي هو مهين ولا يكاد يبين. Alright, let's try to translate that. So the Pharaoh calls upon the people of Egypt, of course. He says that, all my people, do I not have the kingdom of Egypt? And all of these rivers are running under me. So he's boasting about his kingdom. Boasting about what? His power, his ability. Because he owns it, he has control over it. Therefore, he has power over it. And he says, due to this power, am I not better? Am I not more righteous? Am أنا خير? So he uses the word righteous, better, not more powerful. That's clear. But no, what is the end goal? He says, am I not better than him? Of course, he's talking about Moses, peace be upon him. Or this man who is weak, insignificant. He calls him these words. هذا الذي هو مهين. Alright, مهين. This is one of the extreme ways of saying that someone is insignificant and powerless. So in this case, he takes power as the end all be all, and that is why he puts himself as a god or as the source of objectivity or source of truth for his people. In another verse he says, ما أريكم إلا ما أرى وما أهديكم إلا سبيل الرشد. I do not tell you except what I see, and I do not guide you except to the truth, to the right path. So for him, that was the right path. Why? Because he has the power to make it the right path. That's what he said. That's what he thought. So here the question begs, is power the objective criterion we can judge by and use to reach the correct conclusions? Of course not. This is what we will see through this quote. Might makes right. This is a famous historical quote, which means that whomever is the strongest and whatever the strongest claims to be right is what eventually becomes right. This is the concept of enforcement. You enforce the truth. You make it true because you force people to believe in it. And through time, through generations, it becomes the truth due to different reasons which are social in the makeup of human beings. Now, is this quote right or wrong? It can be both right and wrong. In the case of the Almighty God, he has the might and the ability to make what is right and to make what is wrong. So because he possesses absolute power, therefore he is the only one capable of creating the truth and making it true, simply from his power alone. All right? But also on top of that, being objectively right. How so? Because God possesses other attributes, not only power. He possesses infinite knowledge, which prevents him from making any mistake. He has ultimate wisdom, which prevents him from making any contradictions. He also possesses the attribute of being just, the all just. He can never oppress. Therefore, he is the only one that this quote applies to. All right? Now, whether you believe in God or not, as a concept, you are forced to agree with what am I saying? Because this is coherent and logical. So even as a concept, this is objective and this is true. Because if we take an example that there is an Almighty God, 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 3. This is evident. While the creation, let's see the other side now. The creation, which the Pharaoh is part of, humans, of course, even those who claim to be deities and have superpowers, can force something to be considered right. Yes, this is possible and has been done and is still done, continues to be done, even on a much bigger level now. But that's only happening on the surface. All right? They can make it right on the surface. However, it does not necessarily mean that what they are forcing is correct, is true. For example, societal norms. We are all familiar with some societal norms that are completely rubbish, completely false, not objective, not true, not rational. How so? How did they become societal norms? It is due and thanks to power. All right? The same equation that we talked about, the same method enforcing truth by using power in all of its shapes and forms. The same thing goes with myths. And myths here, I'm speaking about beliefs like, for example, polytheism, all right? The belief in different gods and the worship of statues and animals and pantheism and so on. The case of Hindus, for example. All of these things. How did they become so true that those people are not questioning these things? It has become so due to the enforcement of the elite, people of power, who enforced these ideas and beliefs into the masses, let it run to or across time and age, and the result is what we are discussing. Is everything clear? Anything that you like to add? I am more than happy to listen. All right, let's move on. Now we reach a very important part of our session, which has a relation with the previous session. The previous lesson, we talked about the two sides, dichotomy. Here we have a dichotomy, power relations, or we can call it even power dichotomy. We have one side, which is the strong, the powerful. On the other side, we have the weak, the helpless. Now, in this relation, we have different concepts that falls under this dichotomy and different applications, different elements. For example, and now we are starting from the strong to the weak. It means, what does the strong exert over the weak in relation to power? First thing, domination. You can only dominate if you are powerful. Domination is almost a synonym of power. Oppression. You have the ability to oppress. Now, whether you do that or not, that's another discussion, of course. It depends on the use of power, like we said, whether it is a correct use or an incorrect use, an unjust use. Use itself. The strong uses the weak to his advantage, to his benefit. Therefore, he only has the ability, all right? He can use the weak. Whether he does or not, that's irrelevant. It exists. And both sides are maybe aware of it, or one side is aware, the other is not. Or maybe the two sides are not aware, but subconsciously it runs and it works. You can see the results of it, even if both sides are subconsciously not aware of it. Manipulation. You can only manipulate if you have the power to do so. And you can be manipulated only if you are weak and you are in a position of weakness, which results in you being manipulated. Whether that is the result of ignorance or simply physical weakness, sometimes mental weakness, if you are fearful and a coward, and so on. There are infinite examples. Deceit. You are deceived. You can only be deceived if you are weak. Why? Because you do not know the truth. If you don't know the truth, that is a form of weakness, which will be used against you from people who know the truth and choose to cover it and choose to alter it. And we will see later on an example of that. Dismissal. You can be dismissed and done with, can be sacrificed because you are weak. Exploitation, obviously, same as use. You are exploited. Enslavement. This is the most apparent form of such relation which existed in history. All right, it is very apparent. This one is not hidden, not embedded. It's very clear because it's on the surface as well. Not only mental, but physical and social. Social, I mean. Trickery as well. Trickery, although not always, but well, no, it's always. Why? Because in a specific manner or a specific matter, you can be tricked. Yes, you may be strong overall, but if you are tricked, then in that instance, you are in the position of weakness. It can be temporary or it can be long lasting. Now let's see the other side. Now we start from the weak and go to the strong. First thing we have is following. The weak follows the strong. He imitates the strong naturally. Why? Because he looks up to him. He wishes to be like him. He thinks that by imitating him, he will become strong. This is, of course, ignorance, which caused him to be weak in the first place. Obedience. You are forced to be obedient, of course. Why? Because you're fearful of what the strong can do. Trust. You trust the weak. You depend on the, sorry, you trust the strong. You depend on the strong. Why? Because he's able. He has the capability, the ability, and you do not. Therefore, you trust him to do these things in your behalf. This is what happens in our modern day and age with our nations, for example, in relation to Western nations. In fact, everything that we are talking about here applies on that example. Everything. Fandom. Once you take someone as a fan, once you become a fan of somebody, you are positioning yourself in the weak side. You are weaker than that person. You give him power over you, whether willingly or unwillingly. And being a fan entails a lot of things. Means follow, means being obedient, being servient, being or trusting that person. Therefore, you are weak in this relation. Respect the strong enforces respect, and the weak, of course, obliges. He respects the strong because he respects power. He knows that power is something valuable, something important, something that can help him do many things that he wishes to do, but he is unable to do because he lacks power. Therefore, he respects the powerful and wishes to be like him. Servitude and slavery, like we said, these are apparent forms of power relations. It can even reach the level of worship. This is what happened with the followers of the Pharaoh. We talked about the story of the Pharaoh. So those followers, at some point, the Pharaoh did not need to exert power to make him believe or to make them believe in him, to follow him. They already accepted it. It has become a societal norm which is agreed upon by the majority. And therefore, they took it as something truthful and something normal. Yes, we should worship this person because he has the power, and that is logical for them. That's how they thought about it. And that's why, even when the Prophet, Moses, peace be upon him, brought the evidences, supernatural evidences, which actually entails much more power than whatever the Pharaoh has shown them, or whatever the Pharaoh owns or is capable of. They were so blinded. And why? Because they are obedient. They trust the Pharaoh. They are a fan of the Pharaoh. They respect the Pharaoh. They are slaves to him. So they could not think because they do not understand these power relations. This is why it's very important to understand these concepts. It plays a big, big role, especially in our day. All right, because the story of the Pharaoh and his followers keeps on repeating in history. It still exists today, just taking different forms. It's not so obvious, but the end result is the very same. So, of course, they will end up in the same place as the Pharaoh at the end. They were drowned with the Pharaoh and will end up in the same place in the afterlife. So, they have no excuse. Why? Because it is a choice. This is a choice. Whether you are weak or strong, it's you who decides where you position yourself. Why choose to be weak? Why can't you make yourself strong? What prevents you? Yes, sometimes you can be weak in certain areas. You may be weak physically because you suffer some sickness, some chronic sickness. This is normal, this is understandable. But it does not mean that you should be weak overall in your mentality, in your thinking, in your belief, in your actions, in your positions. It certainly does not mean that. And everyone has the chance and was given the chance to be strong, even the crippled. All right? So that's why they are not excused, the people who followed the Pharaoh, because it was their own choice, no matter their excuses. Now, or before that, if you have anything to add about what we discussed here in power relations, be my guest. If you have other concepts we can include in this circle, no, these are just examples. There are obviously different concepts. All right, everything is good. Let's move on to power dynamics in media. Now let's move on to something contemporary. We gave some sort of historical overview about power. Let's move on to something that touches us every day in our daily life, which is media, obviously. So first, also we are using structuralism. What is mainstream media? And who owns mainstream media? Plus why? All right, let's ask and answer the WH questions. So mainstream media is a critical instrument in the hands of who? Of people in power. We can call them the elite, which are the same type of people like the Pharaoh, like Nimrod, and so on. All right, the kings and people in power, people who make the decisions. So, why do they use it? They use it to shape and move events and minds alike to where it is most beneficial for them. Obviously, if you have power, you use it for your benefits. Now, whether you do that ethically or not, this is dependent on the type of person you are. If you are using an objective criteria in your whole life, if your ethics are sound and reasonable and morally upright, so that's a whole different discussion. But at the end, you use it for your benefits. Because even when you use it for the benefit of others, you are benefiting yourself as well, both in this life and the next. Media takes the position of the strong because of reasons such as. Now let's see why media has power, anyways. The first obvious reason is that it is owned by people in power. So it takes power from them. They position this already at a position of power from the get go. This is the most obvious reason. The second reason, and this one is not so obvious, and many people are oblivious to it, it is because it is considered a source of truth. Between parentheses, media as a false prophet. Now let's discuss the concept of reporting. Media started as this concept, the concept of reporting. One person reports that an event has happened, whether he is an historian or simply a normal person on the street. He saw something happening and reported it to another, his friend, his family, whatever. This is a form of media. How so? Of course, they reported the news. Now, the first, and we can call it this a human nature, the first stance we take as someone who is presented by some sort of news is to actually believe it. This is the first thing. All right? Even if you have doubts, when you think about it, you find that, of course, unless you are so sure about it. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about an event that did not know that it happened. All right? Let's say, for example, someone saw another one committing a crime. He comes and tells you this person committed the crime. You don't know the person. Therefore, you have no idea to build upon. All right? The first thing that comes to your mind is to actually believe this person. Why? This is simply human nature. Now, the second thought is to doubt him. But where does power play a role in this is the fact that you actually thought about believing him in the first place. So it's already at the beginning in a position of power. It's already placed as a source of truth. That's why most people believe the news on TV or whatever, or journals, what, whatever. Media takes different shapes and forms. Most people believe in it. Why? Because they take it as a source of truth, an objective source of truth. Why? Many reasons. One, they are ignorant of the different concepts we are just talking about, and they follow the human nature who or which influences them to believe the reporter. Why? Because they have no reason to lie. They are just reporting to us what happened. All right. And since he doesn't have anything to build upon, and he does not make decisions on his own, he lets the media take the decision. And therefore, he is the weak part here, and media is the powerful part. Now, how does media incorporate power? It's by manipulating the narrative and creating propaganda. And obviously, only the powerful can manipulate. This is what we saw earlier. So, if you can manipulate and influence and even create some sort of an event out of scratch, when you can alter the perception of the people, then of course you have power, you have ability. And that is why power plays a big role in media. Here we have a case in point. This is a very famous example given in media studies. All right. Now, before we try to analyze, let's describe what is happening. Can someone interpret or describe this illustration? What is going on? First, apparently, all right. Then we see the different elements and try to understand the relation between these different elements. Here we have one element, a person who is running. Now we are, you know, starting from the reality and going to the media. And someone else is running behind him, trying to catch him. Why? To stab him. So he intends maybe to kill him, maybe to injure him badly. In ways, he intends a harm. So these are two elements of this structure, and we interpreted or we understood the relationship between them. Let's see the other element in this image. We have here someone who is standing, holding a camera, all right? Where in the direction of the other two elements, the other two persons. So what is he doing? He's taking a picture maybe, or taking a video, or whatever. This is media, through the camera. But does he take the whole picture? No. Let's consider this camera as media. This camera has a frame. This frame is not absolute. This frame is limited. It only focuses on one part of what's going on. And in this part, we can see what? We can see a shadow of a person holding a knife, threatening to stab the other person who is screaming. All right. Now, if we cover this, let's say it does not exist, anyone who sees that frame will reach the same conclusion that I just said. And therefore, take this as the truth. And when you see something as an image, add on it the interpretation and the discourse of media, which is a big role, which plays a big role in this. Discourse plays a bigger role than the image, because the interpretation is what gives meaning to the image. Then obviously everyone will believe that the truth is that this person is trying to kill the other, while the reality is totally different. So this is how media can alter the truth and shape the perception of those who are consuming it through both image and words, through the visual and through discourse. And of course, these are very powerful tools. Our senses, they rely on our senses, and our senses are very trusted. This is why I'm saying it is a human nature to believe this at first glance. So you are actually fighting your own human nature to reach the truth. And if you do not know this concept, power, and if you do not know that media is in the hands of people in power, and all of things that we just discussed, then how can you reach the right conclusions? How can you reach the truth? It is practically impossible, especially in our time. The people of falsehood are using extreme methods, complicated methods, in order to alter the truth and hide it. And hiding it is even weaker than altering it. Because, yes, you can hide it, one day it appears. But when you alter the truth, you are still combining truthful parts while adding on it things that are made up and fake. Therefore, it makes it much complicated and much harder to dissect and take the truthful parts and then try to find the rest of it elsewhere. So, this is overall, in a nutshell, the power of deception. Is everything clear? Excellent. Now I think we reached the last part. Before that, if you have any questions, anything to add, you know that you are much welcome. Any concept you want to discuss further, any example you want to give, that would be great and enhance the quality of the seminar. All right, if not, then let's start the quiz. The first question: define power and dynamics. Give a definition of what is power and what is dynamics. A brief definition of the two concepts. This is, of course, to retain the information that we covered in this session. All right. The second question: is power an objective criterion of judgment? And give the reason why. Can we consider power an objective criterion to make the right judgments? All right, let's move on to the third question. What is power dichotomy? So we saw dichotomy in the previous session, and today we handled some examples of that. Try to give me some of these examples and try to interpret what is power dichotomy. We said it's a relation between two parts. Moving on, why is it necessary to be conscious about power dynamics? Why is it important? What is the use, the benefit of being aware, being conscious of power dynamics? This is one of the key parts of this lesson, is to understand what is the use, what's the purpose of understanding power relations. Right, excellent. The last question, how does media incorporate power dynamics? In what way, in what shape, what does it use, and what is its purpose? What does it try to achieve by incorporating power dynamics? All right, wonderful. So we reached the end of our session. Thank you very much for your attendance, for your participation. It is greatly appreciated. I hope that I was able to cover everything necessary. Of course, there are many things to be said, especially due to the intricate nature of this concept, concepts of power. But I tried to give the headlines the most important aspects, and hopefully I did a good job in that. So thank you very much. For those who missed the important parts, no worries. Again, I will be uploading this video in my YouTube channel, and you will be able to go back and get familiar with everything that I covered. So again, thank you for your presence, and see you again in the next session, inshallah, where we will tackle the different types of science. So hopefully you are excited for that, and see you inshallah. Take care of yourselves.